Morning, good afternoon, good evening to you wonderful soldiers. I'm going to put a timer on because last week, for those who watched the last session, at some point, I was like, oh, we're going to end it now, even though it hasn't been 15 minutes. And it was 22 minutes long. Um, so for some reason, once I get in the zone, I get in the zone and I lose track of time and it feels like 5 minutes. It feels like 20 minutes is 5 minutes. Um, on another note, I've been watching Harry Potter with my lover for the first time ever. I did watch the first Harry Potter when I was a kid, a child. Um, and then I watched the second one on bootleg. But if you're from New York, like it was Burger King bootleg, you know what I mean? Those, if you know, you know. AKA most of the movie was missing. So um I'm watching them for the first time now. Very interesting stuff. And my dreams have been very vivid, which I love. I always love a good, vivid dream. I love me a good, vivid dream. I love a story in my dreams. And I've been having a lot of that. On today's boot camp, we are going to talk about rules. And I think this was inspired by Harry Potter. Um, we're going to talk about rules. I want to talk about rules. I want to talk about the rules that we follow, even though they don't feel right. The rules that we follow, even though they don't feel right. There was a moment, there were a lot of moments in my childhood, in my upbringing, where I experienced a lot of anxiety. And I feel in this age like it had a lot to do with having to follow rules that I know didn't feel right in my gut, having to follow other people's directions that didn't feel good to me, that actually gave me anxiety. you know, things like gender roles gave me anxiety as a kid. Things like having to go to prom and having a prom date, that gave me big anxiety as a kid. And I think that when we see kids and teens with anxiety, we or what I've seen done to me, right? People kind of brush me off and were like, "Oh, you'll get over it. This is normal." Um, and it might be for some. It might be normal to have anxiety if you actually like boys and a boy asked you out, right? That might be normal, but for me, I didn't like boys. So the anxiety was coming from another place. Um, there are these rules that we follow, that we still follow, that adults follow, that I noticed, when we ask to be more childlike, when we look at children, we're like, wow, what a big imagination. I feel like the only difference between them and an adult who um who doesn't, who doesn't seem like they have a big imagination is that um you're a child, you don't know the rules yet, right? And interestingly enough, right, the way that I grew up, the way that I was raised by television and me. The way that I was raised, and actually what I mean to say is the type of schooling that I got. I went to many different schools. I think I went to 8 different schools before college. Um, I wasn't taught much, right? So I didn't have a lot of rules in my head. I didn't know history. I didn't know the church. I didn't know small things that really make up the rules that we follow as adults. I didn't learn a lot, and it's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? Because then when I did learn a lot, I was like in college by the time I I was caught up with what I guess with what America thinks, right? Even though I watched TV, right? Even though I watched TV as a kid, but that was always just TV to me. It wasn't uh real yet, right? Media culture wasn't real for me yet until I started learning that it's real for the rest of America. When I was in college, I I went to art school, and they had us making all types of things, right? And they encouraged you to use your imagination. They encouraged you also to research, right? They loved you that you use your imagination, but they also encourage you to do research. When you do research about the things that you're imagining, you find some things out. And I found some things out, and I was kind of pissed. And so I turned my art into a like an anti-system movement, right? That's what I did with my art from 2014 to 2020, really till 2021. Um, I would say until 2019. Then I started really shifting my art. And when I say my art, I mean street refugee. I started shifting that from a from a protest to a motivator. Right? I stopped protesting. I started asking people to imagine more. I started asking people to create more because there is so much room for imagination. There's so much room for imagination. The things that we follow today, they didn't exist thousands of years ago, right? And hopefully they won't exist thousands of years from now, and not because we've gone extinct, but because we have used our imagination to build things that really fit for us. So there are these arbitrary rules that don't even make us feel good that we follow, right? What the hell do we do about that, right? How do you imagine after being brainwashed? I don't want to, what's a better word? Somebody find a better word. How do you imagine after being told the rules, right? Well, I first would have to think like, what would happen if you broke the rules? Are you afraid? Are you afraid to break the rules? Will something actually happen to you physically, mentally, spiritually? Will something happen to you? Will something cause you harm if you break such rules? I think that the reason why we follow them, even though they don't feel good, is because we do fear that something will happen to us. A lot of times, sometimes people have to check me because I will have certain fears for some things, but I won't fear some of the rules, and some people will check me because sometimes I will be in harm's way. I almost signed up to be a policeman. You know my politics, but I wanted to do it for personal reasons. Somebody had to check me, even though I had checked myself already. So I was like, oh, rules. Like I could just join and do this and do that. No, there are rules. Somebody might, I might be in harm's way. Um, in that case. Me personally, me and my politics joining the police department, I may be in harm's way. I may be putting a target on my back. But then other times the rules won't harm you, right? If I wear certain clothing, right? What's going to happen to me? I mean, in some countries, or in this country, in some places, sometimes some things do happen to you, right? But it's not like once you put the clothes on and you go outside, something's always going to happen to you, right? You have to think about the inevitability of you being harmed if you go against the grain. And even then, I would say I don't give a F. Because even after the realization that if I join this organization and they find out my politics, They will put me in a trunk, right? I went that far. I was like, they're going to kill me. I know they're going to kill me, right? Even then, I was like, oh, but will they? You know, you got to have that kind of mentality when going against the grain. You kind of have to be a little bit delulu. We're delulu about other things, right? We can be delulu about going against the grain, right? Will something actually happen to you? Will it? Probably not. Maybe something better will come out of it than something worse. Yeah. There's also this fear of being casted out, right? When you go against the grain and you have a certain group around you who does not go against the grain, right? People who follow the rules, and all of a sudden you don't follow the rules, you might be casted out, right? But what does that mean to be casted out when you are already who you are? What does it mean to be casted out if you are already who you are? They just found out, right? What does it mean to be different and deny yourself your truth? That hurts more to me. That hurts a lot more to me. There were people have done some terrible things to make sure that others are in fear. People have done some terrible things to make sure that I'm gonna say we, because if you're watching this, most likely you have African ancestry or ancestry that is not your solely European, right? Like I said, people have done some wild things. So even if you do have African ancestry, there is a chance that you do also have European ancestry by force. But anyways, people have done some crazy things to make sure that we don't go against the grain, right? Where you come from, no matter where you come from, imagination was valued. Imagination was important. Imagination was vital until somebody came and decided that they rule, right? One of the biggest ways I feel like Europeans succeeded was in destroying our ability to imagine, destroy our ability to imagine. I might argue with myself about that because with all these apps, right? All these games, how could they have killed imagination? Aren't we imagining right now? Aren't you imagining right now watching me on Zoom? I feel like even with all the apps and all the games and all the Zooms, there's like this finite, there's a limit to the imagination. If we go too far, it induces fear. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You have anxiety if you don't go against the grain. You have anxiety if you do go against the grain. What's the difference, B? Why would I go against the grain if it gives me anxiety anyways? Because the other side might be the cure to your long-lasting anxiety. I come from a family with a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of famine. There was a lot of things going on in their upbringing where they came from, in the Dominican Republic, in Cuba, in Anguilla. That's where my parents are from. There was a lot going on to make sure that they did not imagine, right? They had to worry about how to get food. My dad had to worry about building his home, his grandmother's home, out of clay weekly because it doesn't necessarily stay together. My dad drove me through his old neighborhood. I was a kid. My dad drove me through one of his neighborhoods in Dominican Republic. Um, and gave me a lot of perspective, right? It gave me a lot of perspective. And I would also say in his time, he had more room to imagine a little bit. I don't know if I want to go here? The further we move from nature, the further we move from nature, the less space, the less time we have for imagination. Did that make sense? The further we move from nature, the less time we have for imagination. The further we move from nature, yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say. We have less time to imagine. Yeah. This era, this computer era, this uh, Aquarian era. Actually, no. I'm gonna leave that for the astrology girlies. I'm actually not gonna go there. Let's go back. Let's go back. The closer you are to nature, the more room you have for imagination. I see that now living in the South, when I meet more people from the South who were very close to nature, they had more room for imagination. Whereas I grew up in New York, I had less room for imagination. There was less time. Um, there was less space for imagination. I lost my train of thought because of that astrology bit. But what I was trying to say with my dad and all of that is that in my family, we'll just go all the way back, right? There were although they were close to nature, there were oppressive uh circumstances to make sure that they didn't imagine too much, right? In the Dominican Republic, where my parents, where my dad was born, my mom wasn't born in Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic, where my dad was born, they had certain laws to make sure that they fell in line, right? That they fell with one person's objective or one group of people's objective. And we see this today, even though we have the TikToks and all the things, right? In what places can you imagine um, more? In what places can you expand your imagination? In what spaces and what places are you limiting your imagination? What places can you expand? What places are you scared to expand? What places are you not asking enough questions about? All right. I think I'll go for like 2 more minutes. Um, yeah. Imagination, fear, there are a lot of boxes that we're putting ourselves in that only exist up here for good reason, but they only exist up there. There are certain fears that I have. There are certain fears that I have that other people don't have, right? And that says something about what is real and what is not. There's so much room to play. There's so much room to imagine. There's so much room to make a different tomorrow. All right. So, what do you want to imagine? What do you want your tomorrow to be like? What is something that you have been following for God knows how many years that actually gives you anxiety? What are some things that you're following that actually give you a lot of anxiety? What are some things that you are blindly, things that you're not questioning that give you a lot of anxiety? I'm going to ask myself that today because I feel like I'm limiting myself in some ways, right? I'm an artist. We're all artists. You're watching this because you're an artist. There is room to play. Where are we putting ourselves in this little box? This little box. In this little box. that might be holding you back, right? This might be the message that you need to expand your imagination. And I hope that you do. I'll see y'all next week. Peace.